There are a lot of writers capable of giving a concise definition of what cyberpunk is, but few have the delivery of Cyberpunk 2020's creator, Mike Pondsmith.
In a cyberpunk world, I realized real soon, was a world where people had the technology, but it didn't fundamentally change the fact that there was a lot of treacherous, nasty behavior. Cyberpunk isn't about saving humanity, it's about saving yourself.
This short explanation leaves writers with plenty of room to play around with when imagining a future that's grounded in the present. For those familiar with the adaptation of Altered Carbon, that connection to reality may have been difficult to locate. Of the many first-wave cyberpunk writers who are still speculating about science and technology, William Gibson has remained an authority on the genre. His early work laid out the philosophy, defined the vocabulary, and designed the aesthetic of the future, as seen from the 1980s. Altered Carbon, like a lot of cyberpunk, is heavily derivative of Gibson's writing, especially Neuromancer. Like that version of Chiba, Bay City has its Razor Girls, Joe Boys, and a backstabbing family walking in the shadow of Tessier Ashpool. The sameness of Altered Carbon's world is both unimaginative and embarrassingly dated, making it difficult to accept this future. In the foreword to his short story collection, Burning Chrome, Gibson explains that an imagined future requires a history to inform its setting, otherwise it won't resonate with the reader. Global recession in the late 1970s slowed economic expansion in the 1980s. Wall Street gave us Black Monday, crippling markets in Europe, Hong Kong, and the US. Japan recovered ahead of the rest of the world and went on to thrive. And as their economic influence grew, the potential for war between the US and the Soviet Union continued to keep the whole world on edge.
I'm 75 years old, and I've got my finger on the button. I just couldn't think of anything more scary than that. Trick or treat, fellas.
Money manipulation and nuclear annihilation were raw materials converted into futures where the US, USSR, or both were thrown into dysfunction, while Japan grew into an economic superpower that exported corporations and culture to all corners of the planet. This is a future that felt credible, because it was informed by events that were relevant to its audience. Then the 90s came. The Soviet Union fell, Japan's asset bubble burst, and the internet was fully commercialized. With a new position on the global stage, and a new economic reality at home, Japanese filmmakers in the 90s expressed their view of the future through films like the disturbing Rubber's Lover, the inimitable Ghost in the Shell, and an uncomfortably prescient series, Serial Experiments Lane. With nothing to anchor to a credible past, Altered Carbon's world has nothing to inform its aesthetic choices. That only serves to remind us that we've seen all this before, in a setting with the proper context. There is, however, one idea from early cyberpunk that is still relevant today: the impact of globalism. Technology connected the planet and created new economic opportunities for both nations and corporations. Urbanization then becomes a top priority to better accommodate the realities of mass migration. This allows for a more natural cultural exchange, resulting in new societies. By his name alone, Takeshi Kovacs symbolizes this idea. He's lived it out on other planets, in different eras, from inside different bodies. Bay City doesn't. Superficiality and stereotypes undermine cultural exchange, leading to exploitation and othering of people from what's supposed to be their own culture, further demonstrating how uninformed this future is. And this problem continues with Altered Carbon's use of technology. Cyberpunk has always appreciated the importance of technology, but Gibson was one of the first to focus on computers, even if he didn't quite understand them himself.
I'm not the sort of person to go and listen to an entirely theoretical lecture about computers, and I don't play with computers for fun. That
of course changed, and now technological literacy is required to truly appreciate Gibson's writing.
Basically, since so much of the world we live in feels now like science fiction, why not try using those tools to describe contemporary reality?
Books in the Bigen trilogy, steeped in post-9/11 paranoia, understands the versatility of emerging technology, that governments are always 2 steps behind digital natives, and articulates how seamlessly cyberspace and meat space have merged into the same reality. This is the realm of post-cyberpunk, where technology is no longer a mystery. And as good as the Bigen books are, pattern recognition in particular, the best example of this is Sam Esmail's Mr. Robot. Mr. Robot knows the business of cybersecurity, recognizes power in America, takes political positions without apology, and uses this all to express our shared situational anxiety in a future that was once imaginary. It also understands technology like nothing else before it.
It lets us plant an asymmetric backdoor, then create a VPN in the Steel Mountain intranet.
Okay, we all know what a Raspberry Pi is. What's your point?
This is crucial for science fiction as a whole, because the media we consume contributes to our understanding of the world. Altered Carbon's super wealthy, cloning and freezing themselves, can be traced all the way back to a neuromancer. But what sets this apart is the use of stacks, a small drive at the base of the skull where consciousness is stored. For those who can afford it, stacks allow them to live indefinitely by constantly changing sleeves. Some copy their stacks and occupy more than one sleeve at a time, effectively creating twins. And those at the top of the economic ladder back up their consciousness every other day thanks to cloud storage, making real death, the destruction of their stacks, a mere inconvenience. This is effectively Cartesian dualism, and it's problematic when discussing consciousness. Nearly 400 years after René Descartes argued that the human soul, the essence of a person complete with memory and personality, sat in the pineal gland of the brain, medical science has advanced enough to know that this is not how consciousness works. Stacks want to be treated like the soul in Cartesian dualism, but these implants function in a manner similar to whole brain emulation, where a copy of a consciousness can be uploaded to another platform, resulting in a person and a double. In this scenario, what are the effects of moving into new sleeves? How can the new stack claim to be the original? Why do these manufactured twins seem so similar, despite experiencing things independently, which should result in distinct personalities? Not once does Altered Carbon take the opportunity to ponder the obvious complications of stacks, with no consideration given to the effects of its theoretical science. Altered Carbon simply asks the audience to accept alien magic without explanation. How dualism and sleeve technology are used in the story makes this even more difficult. Sleeves are arguably the most expensive commodity in this future. People like the Bancrofts can stock up, while grounders have to hope Bay City's bureaucracy exercises a little consideration.
What have you done to our daughter? Cindy's 7 years old. The law says she gets a free sleeve, and that one's free. If you don't like it, pay for an upgrade, put her back in storage.
What remains true for everyone is that immortality has affected humanity in ways that have been exhausted before. Women are routinely beaten and murdered for failing to meet the sexual demands of men who find no fault in their actions so long as their stacks remain in one piece. An unwanted pregnancy is reason enough to kill the body and torture the mind for what feels like an eternity. And a woman who is described as cunning and powerful after centuries of wealth and privilege can only think of sexual extortion as a means of getting what she wants. As futurist and artist Monica Bielskite puts it,
how come that somebody like me, who is a present-day person, is more futuristic than most of the women that are being depicted in these future scenarios?
It could be argued that this uneven treatment of sleeves is a dark use of Cartesian dualism, or an over-reliance on the noir aspects of cyberpunk. But Altered Carbon does give us a thoughtful change of pace, with Kristen Ortega. She's somewhere between agnosticism and atheism, placing her at odds with her neo-Catholic family who oppose the use of stacks. She surprises the family by bringing Grandma Ortega to dinner.
Ay, cálmate, Alasne. It's like you've never seen a tattoo before.
There's a clash of culture and generation that forces the family into the uncomfortable position of considering the limitations of their beliefs.
I wish you would have come with us to church today. Father Huerta talked about a miracle.
Oh, this is a miracle. Right here. The fact that people don't have to die anymore, that's a miracle.
Only God can perform miracles.
Conquering death is thrilling, but Ortega's grandmother sees her trip in a skinhead's body as her last.
Y hay que aceptar que la muerte es parte de la vida. Y por favor, mi amor, ya no me resucites otra vez, ¿ok? Por favor.
Ortega must then consider if life, with or without a god, has meaning because of its impermanence. Ortega also goes against popular opinion when it comes to Kovach's current sleeve. It used to belong to Riker, her boyfriend and a fellow police officer who's been framed. Following Kovach around had little to do with keeping an eye on him. It was all about making sure Riker could return to the right sleeve. In a world of extremes, Ortega lives in the middle, understanding that stacks have changed everything about life, and at the same time harboring a sentimentality that's quite old-fashioned. Being of two minds on this subject could have been interesting to explore further, but Altered Carbon speeds past these ideas to make room for the Kovach family reunion. After killing their abusive father, Kovach is adopted by the government to become a SeaTac officer, and Raylene, his younger sister, is sold to the Yakuza. They cross paths as adults, kill their way to freedom, and are separated again until she rescues him in Bay City. The difference in time, we're led to believe, transformed Rey from a clingy little sister into a sociopathic goddess, complete with a seat in the heavens, religious henchmen, and a locker full of backup sleeves. Money separates the two Reys, but otherwise, they're the same person.
I'm gonna show you how much I love you.
At her earliest opportunity, Rey is focused on getting her brother away from the envoys, and especially their leader Quellcrest. When she doesn't get away, she contacts SeaTac and betrays her group in exchange for escape and leniency for Kovac, but takes the opportunity to kill Quellcrest herself. In the current timeline, after he's released, Rey spies on him until she's able to isolate him, then continues to do whatever it takes to make sure that it's just the two of them. If Rey has always been this possessive and jealous when it comes to Kovac, and was willing to take part in killing dozens to get him, arguing that money, influence, or immortality are to blame for her actions, doesn't make sense. As outdated as Altered Carbon is, it's only responding to a trend. Consider the American adaptation of Ghost in the Shell, a movie full of bad decisions.
You don't have to come here anymore.
The visual language is so deliberate in its use of earlier works that it misses an opportunity to craft its own visual style. The 2017 movie managed to do less to reimagine the look and feel of this world than other Ghost in the Shell movies have, since the first in 1995. Even when old cyberpunk stories are revived and earn critical praise, like Blade Runner 2049, they exist with a self-awareness that tries to justify their analog future to an audience living in a digital age.
As I was doing the movie, sometimes I was feeling I was more doing a period movie than a sci-fi movie.
Reaching back into the 80s to comment on the future is a strategy many are relying on, but they don't have to. Not at this level. Not when there's contemporary media that's forward-thinking about the future, respects science, understands technology, and is informed by a reality that's relevant to its intended audience. For those who aren't bothered by this derivative culture, you're in luck, because this obsession with the past is spreading faster all the time, and without credible alternatives, it'll chase us well into the future.